Don't you just hate it when you spend lots of money on some nice clothes, and then some jerk just blows all of them to bits? I know we've all been there. So, one of the first things I want to address is, to be honest, I realized that the game isn't really a roguelike anymore. It's not even really a roguelite. Well, that's what I planned on making initially. The game's certainly gone in a different direction, with permadeath no longer really being a thing, and it being more of a traditional RPG in some respects, with random generation. So I don't know that I could want to argue with others about whether or not my game qualifies as a roguelike, so we're just cutting that out. So one of the fun things I did recently for the game is I was able to work on the backgrounds instead of just having these static space backgrounds. We have these waving and color cycling backgrounds that are reminiscent of something out of Earthbound. And I wouldn't have figured out how to do these on my own, but after watching a Retro Game Mechanics Explained video on how the battle backgrounds were done in Earthbound, I was able to program a shader myself that accomplishes the same thing. And so it was a really good video. I'll put a link in the description, and you should really check it out. It was very interesting, and if you want to make a shader like this, or want even a copy of the code I use for your own project, I'd be happy to share. Although it doesn't work properly in Android for reasons I don't really understand. So, one of the things I actually spent the most work on was something that's a bit under the surface. It's not something that you'll notice necessarily, but I changed the way item information, creature information, etc. is stored. Instead of it all being defined programmatically at runtime, it is stored in various spreadsheets. And so it might seem a bit silly to put some of this data in just spreadsheets, but it helps keep stuff organized, and one of the big benefits is it should make the game easily moddable, because all the information is stored in spreadsheets that really anyone should be able to edit, or anyone should be able to create spreadsheets and save them. It'll be very easy for people to create mods that change item information, or rebalance stuff if the balancing is bad, or even just create completely new items and stuff. And it makes it a lot easier for me to keep stuff organized. So I also have added a few new items, new weapons for some of the characters, and new armor. And so, as you can see, the mech artist now has a flamethrower, which isn't necessarily as accurate, but I thought it suited the character a bit more than the previous weapon. That was a bit of fun. And that was the first weapon I made from scratch in the new system, so it was a good way to test stuff out. There's also a new effect system. The effects in the game are very important. Like, they appear under your character's body part health, stuff like bleeding, which will drain your blood, being stunned, which can cause you to be stunned and take extra damage, being frozen, burning. So, in addition to these basic effects, there are other effects that will oppose them. For example, applying a bandage will no longer simply clear bleed, but will apply an opposing status effect called a bound, which will protect from bleed. It will resist it, so bleed will drain from it, and it will drain from bleed. Similarly, making yourself wet using water will resist burn. So you can even apply this preemptively to reduce damage you take from fire-based attacks or heat-based attacks. And that, I think, adds a lot of strategy to the game, and it makes the effect system more complex. And so these status effects are very important to the tactics of the game. Another important thing is you can now view information about your weapons and armor. I feel like in the past, I felt like it was a bit of a black box, how much damage your weapon would deal, how much your stats would affect weapons, and now all that information is viewable. It might be a bit difficult to understand, but you can see how much damage a weapon does, how much its damage is affected by your skill level. And skills are not really accessible right now, but they're altered by your base abilities. The 6 abilities will affect them. And so you can also see how repairing weapons and armor and upgrading them will also affect their stats. And so when weapons break and armor breaks, it'll be unequipped. You can't wear it anymore. So it's very apparent when your armor gets destroyed because it's removed from your character. But all your armor can be repaired, all your weapons can be repaired, and their durability, their basic current wear and tear will also affect their abilities. So as a weapon wears down, or armor wears down, their effectiveness will decrease. Items can be upgraded just using... upgrade and repair items can be synthesized from just iron or calcium, or they can be found by destroying terraform. So additionally, I added new syringes for healing different body parts. In the past, the red syringe would just heal everything, but now syringes will only work on body parts of the same type. So just as there are 4 material types of body parts, there are 4 types of syringes, each synthesized from the appropriate body part. So that does make playing with mixed body parts a bit more difficult because you can't just use one syringe to heal everything. And it can make it difficult, very easy to run out of resources. And so I think I need to work on balancing it. It's right now the game is very difficult and rather punishing in regards to how materials work. It's very easy to run out of materials. You will not when trying to restore body parts to above or at least at level 0. And so I think I would like to either make scavenging yield more materials or make upgrading and repairing and healing cheaper. But there's always rebalancing to do. So another new feature in the game was something that should make the game less frustrating. Both me and my brother have found the game frustrating when playing. We've been the only ones to really play it. Sorry about that, but we both expressed some frustration with how punishing losing experience points is. So it's very similar to the Bloodstained Dark Souls. You'll drop with this little spinning puzzle piece that's just a peace of mind, and it'll restore your experience points. And I think that goes a long way towards making me not want to give up on playing. It makes it so after dying, I'll actually want to keep playing and try to get that back instead of just wanting to give up at how much I've lost. And so that's a summary of the new stuff. I mean, there's always lots of little stuff that I might not mention, but hopefully you'll just be able to try it all yourself, not too long. There's always one more thing I want to add to make it more presentable. And so let's go over that. What is next? What can I hopefully finish before the end of the year when I've said I'm going to release an alpha? One of the first things I want to change is I want to change the way the world is represented, the way it's stored. So currently there's a very three-dimensional world. While the game is represented in 2D, of course, 2D graphics, it is three-dimensional. And so every chunk is made of stacked grids. And so a grid might be full of blocks. It might be very sparse, there's a few blocks, mostly empty space. Or a grid might be completely empty and there's no grid if a layer is empty. But this means, for one, okay, if every terrain is unique, you can have floating blocks. You can have stuff like ceiling. It's fine, I guess. But also it can lead to a lot of waste. With stuff like ceilings, you have to constantly fiddle with, so changing ceiling camera depth, etc., so that your view isn't obscured. So I'm thinking of changing to a simpler system, perhaps a more limited system. Instead of having a unique grid for every Z position, I'm just simply going to switch to a height map system, where there'll be one grid, and flags will be set on terrain to set their height. This is something that I've thought about a lot. There are pros and cons. There definitely will lead to some simplification. Some stuff will be lost as a result, but I think the pros outweigh the cons. It should make the game more efficient. It should run better. There's less data to parse through. Because chunks will be smaller data-wise, they'll be faster to generate, and you will have bigger worlds. And it should also mean that the player should not have to fiddle with changing depth to be able to not be obscured by ceiling. You should not have to scroll much. And you shouldn't have to fiddle with the depth and stuff, because there'll be perhaps more limited Z layers that are being used. So obviously the cons of that might be, might be more limited variation in depth in Z positions, and you're not going to be able to have ceiling above you. I don't know if ceiling is really a pro, but obviously for something like the hotels that you go and do, it will be difficult to represent with simply a height map. But that's why I believe in my previous video I mentioned having a zones, a system where stuff like indoor areas like hotels will be in separate zones. I think obviously in mini games, in 2D games, and these old NES RPGs, if you enter into a building, it'll transition to a completely different scene. And so I'll do something like that. You'll have little entrances that will effectively send you underground onto some other zone for buildings. From a presentation perspective, that might lead to a lot of these areas basically being underground or small. I don't know, something kind of like Fancy Star. I'm not really sure. But I think it should make the game easier to navigate. And having extra zones should really open up the potential for stuff like dungeons, which also, having an overworld and underworld should also help with balancing the game, so that if more difficult enemies are in dungeons, you won't necessarily encounter them accidentally, you won't get constantly killed by them. And while I could do that system without switching the height map system, if height maps making chunks simpler will certainly make it easier to make more of those. So yeah, that's a bit technical, but it will have a big impact on how the game looks. And I guess I'd apologize if perhaps you look at the way the game is now and you're like, I want to play that with how it looks now. Like, I hope you won't be frustrated or disappointed if the game's presentation becomes a bit simpler or and loses some of the three-dimensionality, but I really believe that it should make the game easier to play. I hope that that's easy to understand, and that's what I'll work on next. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. So in addition to switching to a height map system and adding zones, which would change the way the world is, I decided that I want to add the adversary of humanity soon as a race or species. So, the adversary of humanity, they're very important to the game's lore and story, and obviously I do have a story plan for the game that is pretty, it's all behind the scenes. There's not really much represented in the game, but hopefully these characters should express some of the themes that I've been planning. And so, hopefully, you'll be seeing those things soon. Hopefully, I'll be able to finish those things and then stick out the game. I don't know if I'll be able to have everything as presentable as I'd like before the end of the year, but I really do want to be able to put out an alpha for people to play by the end, even if it's maybe on December 31st, so I can push it to the last minute. But I'll try my hardest. I have been working on this every day that I can. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you are excited for the game. I hope you're not disappointed or frustrated by the changes that might be made. And I hope that the changes I have should make the game much funner by the time you get a look at it. Thank you very much.